Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We are going to start with a little bit of fun. We're going to start with a March Madness bracket. We know that's that time of year, and we're going to do that with football teams. We're going to do a little twist on it, so we're going to do what would happen if all of these teams played in 2023. Then we're going to jump into Chris Sims had some wide receiver rankings come out for the 2024 class, and they are kind of a doozy, so we'll get into all of that. Then we're going to get into breakout players on the offensive side of the ball. This is part 3 of this edition. There are so many guys that are ready to step into some big shoes or just be bigger parts of their team's future in 2024 that we will get into. And then finally, we will finish it off with a Top 10 Tuesday. Today, we're going to keep going on the basketball football route. We're going to do schools in 2023 and 2024, that academic year, that have set the pace for everyone else. The top 10 teams in basketball and football this year, some teams that obviously made the tournament but also had some success on the football field. So before we jump in, though, I do want to remind you all that we get a ton of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your comments on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all to see your questions on the screen, and maybe I can answer them. We can have a fun back and forth here. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in because it is March Madness time. It is one of my favorite times of the year. We have tons of incredible basketball on the way, my favorite postseason of really any sport, and everyone's talking about basketball. But I did see something on the Cover 3 pod, one of the great pods in college football right now, that is they went through the bracket and they decided who would win on a football field. So if these football teams were to face off in 2023, how would it shake out and who would be your eventual national champion? So that's what we're going to do. We have a ton of teams to watch. We have a ton to get to. But let's start with the top half of the bracket here. And let's start with the East. So the big division, the one with UConn as the number 1 overall seed, the one where Virginia went down to a 16 seed all that time ago. But this is the football edition, so let's get to that. We got, first of all, Jim Mora and UConn would get a quick win over Stetson in the first round, move on to the round of 32. Tom Herman and the FAU Owls would not be able to handle Northwestern, I don't think. They had a very good year under David Braun, who then got hired, so I think Northwestern would win that one. San Diego State runs a very interesting offense, a lot of quarterback runs with Jalen Maiden. I think they would be able to knock off UAB, although that'd be a very, very tough fight against Trent Dover's squad down there in Birmingham. But then we continue down the list, and this is where the blowouts start to happen. We have Auburn dominating Yale, Baylor over Duquesne, Illinois knocks off Morehead State, Cam Ward and Wazoo knock off Drake. So all of these games pretty cut and dry. I don't think there's any question there. And then we get to the fun one, the 15-2 South Dakota State against Iowa State. And I got to be honest, I think it would be a tough matchup, and I think Iowa State might just come out on top. But at the end of the day, there's only a couple of national title champions at the end of the year. So South Dakota State deserves their respect. They move on to the next round and start a little bit of a run here. We have South Dakota State obviously continuing their run against Cam Ward and Washington. They move on to play BYU, who I think would knock off Illinois in a very, very tough defensive battle. Auburn would knock off San Diego State with not much trouble there. And then UConn would fall to Northwestern. David Braun, again, did a great job this year, so I think he would set up a matchup with Auburn that would not go his way. I think that Auburn offensive line and defensive line would just be too much for Northwestern. I think Auburn would win that one and move on to the Elite Eight, where they'd be joined by the Jackrabbits. Again, this is a team that won a title. This is a team that deserves some respect, and they're definitely getting it here. They move on to the Elite Eight, where they'll face off against Auburn, and this is a game where I'm about 100% confident that Auburn would win this game, but at the end of the day, South Dakota State, deserves their respect. They went undefeated. They won the FCS. I think I got to move them on to the Final Four. So they come out of the East Division, and then we get to the South Division, the one right across. Houston is coming in with a lot of energy into the tournament, but that doesn't much matter in ours because there is a lot of different things at stake. They do roll in the first round over Longwood. A&M beats a tough Nebraska team, but I think Connor Wegman would make enough plays in that game for them to get that win. Then we would go to Wisconsin, likely beating James Madison, although I kind of feel bad about that pick. I feel like James Madison did deserve some respect after the year they had, but I think I would still go Badgers in that matchup. Duke would get an easy win over Vermont, and then we get into some really, really good matchups. Texas Tech against NC State would be just an awesome game. I think it would be incredible, but I think Peyton Wilson in that Wildcat defense would just be a little bit too much for Texas Tech. I think they would get the win there. Kentucky would roll over Oakland. Florida would beat Colorado, I think, by a hair, although the talent of Colorado would make that very, very interesting. I think that would be a super fun game to watch if we ever got that one in 2023. And then Western Kentucky would beat a non-existent team from Chicago in Marquette, so they would just be playing alone on a field, so that helps a little bit for them. A&M, I think, beats Houston pretty comfortably to go to the Sweet 16. Duke wins a tough battle over Wisconsin. I think Duke's defense would just be too much for that Wisconsin offense that never really found their footing in 2023. And then you got Kentucky. I think they would beat NC State. I think that D-line of Kentucky would be pretty dominant, and I think Ray Davis would have a day. So I think Kentucky would win a close one there. Florida beats Western Kentucky in an absolute shootout, in my opinion. I think Western Kentucky is a team that absolutely could have made a run. Obviously, Malachi Corley, the remarkable wide receiver that's now going into the draft, would have played a big part in that game if that were to happen. And then Kentucky beats Florida because they beat Florida this year, so that one's not too hard to figure out. I think Duke would knock off. I think Duke would knock off Kentucky or knock off Texas A&M in a very, very tough one. That one's very interesting, of course, because Duke and Mike Elko would be facing off against the team that he is just about to play, and then they would head on to face Kentucky, where I think Kentucky would get the win. I think there's a big argument to be made for Duke. Obviously, these are two blue bloods in the basketball game, but not so much in the football game. But I think both these guys are incredible. I would lean Kentucky on the line of scrimmage, so I would say Kentucky wins this region and heads on to the Final Four to join South Dakota State. Then we'll go down to the bottom half of the bracket. We have so many good matchups in this part of the bracket. I think the West is particularly interesting. We start with North Carolina rolling over Howard with Drake May going absolutely crazy. Then we have Mississippi State, I think, would win a battle of the MSUs against Michigan State. St. Mary's and Grand Canyon do not have a team, so I'm just going to go with the higher seed in St. Mary's there, and it's pretty much Bama rolling straight to the Sweet 16 because Bama would get a big win over Charleston and then would play a non-existent team. So they would roll on to the Sweet 16 pretty quickly. Clemson would get a big win over New Mexico. I think Baylor would kill Colgate. Nevada beats Dayton. Arizona and Noah Fafita roll over Long Beach State. And then we get into the second round. North Carolina beats Mississippi State in what I think would be kind of a battle, but Drake May would just be too much for that. I think, obviously, Alabama would win over the non-existent St. Mary's. Clemson, I think, would get the win over Baylor, and then Arizona would get a big win over Nevada to move them on to the Sweet 16 as well. Then we would have a very good couple of matchups. North Carolina against Bama. This is just too much for Drake May in North Carolina. I think Bama would definitely get the win here. And then Arizona, I think, would beat Clemson in an offensive battle. I think Noah Fafita would have an absolute day. And that Arizona defense was absolutely no slouch last year. So I think Arizona would move on to the Elite Eight to face Alabama, where their season would end, where their fun would end, because this Bama team would just be too physical, I think, for that Arizona team. But at the end of the day, this game would have been incredible to watch last year because two very different styles, two really good quarterbacks. I think it would have been a lot of fun, and possibly we could see that as a playoff matchup this upcoming year in 2024. But let's move to the Midwest. because this is a very interesting bracket. Some teams that don't have teams, that's kind of the case sometimes with the March Madness teams, but at the end of the day, let's get underway here. We got Purdue obviously getting a big time win in their first round matchup. TCU gets a big time win over Utah State. McNeese beats a non-existent Gonzaga team, and Jalen Daniels and Kansas beat up on Samford to move to the second round. Then we got Oregon knocking off South Carolina. I think that would be a fun game, but Bo Nix and Oregon's offense would just be too much. Akron beats a non-existent team from Creighton. Texas likely beats up on either Virginia or Colorado State. I think those could be somewhat interesting games, but I think Texas would likely pull away in the second half. And then Tennessee beats up on St. Peter's, who, again, does not have a team. So a couple of these teams are getting some buys here in the early rounds, but now the fun really starts in this division. We have TCU against Purdue. I think that would be a really fun game. It would be Hudson Card against a team that he used to play when he was at Texas and TCU. But I think TCU would definitely get the win there. And I think Kansas would roll to the Sweet 16 over McNeese. And then we get to the bottom half. And Oregon, I think, would beat up on Akron. And then Texas would win the Battle of the UTs in an SEC preview game over Tennessee. I think that one would be pretty close. I think Joe Milton would make just enough mistakes for the Texas defense to take advantage of, and they would continue rolling on. Then we get to two games that are going to be absolutely awesome. Well, TCU and Kansas. I think Kansas beats TCU to get to the Elite Eight, and then Oregon against Texas might be the best game in this entire bracket. I think that's a game that everyone really wanted to see. Both teams lost to Washington in very, very close games. Both teams had very good quarterbacks and very good offenses. I think it's a game that everyone would have loved to see throughout the college football season, but I'd lean Texas in that game. I think Oregon's offensive line and defensive line would not necessarily be up to the task of taking care of Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, so I'd lean Texas to win that one, to then beat Kansas because, well, they beat Kansas in the Elite Eight and then move on to the Final Four. So we finally have a Final Four, and it looks something like this. We have South Dakota State coming up against Alabama, and I gotta say, as much respect as I have for South Dakota State, I think they would get pretty much manhandled by Alabama, so I'd have to go with the Crimson Tide there. And then I think Texas beats Kentucky by a fairly good margin. I think their defensive line would have quite the day, honestly, against the Kentucky O-line. And then we would get a fun little rematch. We would get Bama against Texas, the rematch from the game in Tuscaloosa that Texas was able to take and kind of set their season off into what it ended up being, and a game that, funnily enough, we were literally a couple of plays in each of those semifinal games from getting as our national title in football. So very interesting how all of this worked out, but again, Texas beat Bama, so I feel like I have to go in the Longhorns' direction. I think if this were to play out without Georgia, without Ohio State, without Penn State, without LSU, without all of these incredible teams in the field, Michigan, obviously the national champion in football, not in the field in basketball, so that helped out Texas a little bit here, but I think Texas would be the national champions if they played it out on the football field and not on the basketball court. Now, I am not endorsing they play these games on a football field because that is far too many games in far too short a period of time, but it's always a fun exercise when we get to this time of year to kind of blur the lines between the two sports and bring together what I think is the best postseason to the best regular season in college football. So a lot of really, really fun games throughout this one. I think Texas A&M, Nebraska in the opening round, obviously a Big 12 throwback, which was awesome. Texas, Oregon, I talked about, I think would have been an incredible game to watch last year. Texas, Tennessee, always a fun one when those guys get to match up. And then Alabama, Arizona is right up there with Texas, Oregon for games that I really, really wanted to see last year, but just wasn't in the card. So I think this was a very fun exercise. We had a ton of very interesting matchups, a ton of teams that win a little bit further than they probably will go this time around in the basketball tournament, like South Dakota State. But at the end of the day, three of these teams, well, mainly two. I don't know if Texas is going to make a Final Four run, but Kentucky and Alabama absolutely have a shot to follow this little run up and this non-existent, not important exercise. They could follow it up with something very important in a Final Four run of their own. So a lot of fun this time of year. I think it's one of my favorite weeks of the year, being able to watch all of the games all at once, have as many TVs up as I possibly can. But I thought I would take it to the football side of things and kind of blur the lines a little bit and enjoy it a little bit. But this is an incredible time of year. I think March Madness is just awesome, so definitely enjoy it. I think this one's going to be particularly crazy with not a ton of teams that are kind of separating themselves from the pack. Obviously, UConn is just an absolute powerhouse, but beyond that, it feels like it's pretty wide open. So definitely enjoy this. Get all your TVs going. Get everything on. But for now, we are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Chris Sims. We did his breakdown of the quarterback rankings in this upcoming 2024 draft. Now it's time for wide receivers, and these are a little bit more contentious than the quarterback ones, I'll be honest. So definitely stick with us, and we will be right back after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a little bit of an interesting exercise. We went through the March Madness bracket that came out on Sunday as everything is starting tonight, and we went through and decided who would win on the football field. So who would win this incredible wild 64-team playoff if it were to play out on the football field. Always a fun exercise around this time of year. But now let's get back to purely football. Chris Sims recently released his new wide receiver rankings for this upcoming NFL draft, and they're a little bit interesting. I don't necessarily disagree with all of it. I think he has some legs to stand on some of his arguments, but at the end of the day, I have a very different ranking than he does. So let's start with his. He broke his up into the tiers that he normally does. If you haven't seen the quarterback one that we did, definitely go check out that segment because I agreed with those a little bit more than I'm going to agree with these. But he had three different groups that he separated these guys into. One being explosive wide receiver, one being no bust NFL ready, and then high end skill set. So guys that can do one thing or a couple of things incredibly well and can be used very effectively in certain situations. So let's start with the explosive wide receiver one group. The guys that he thinks are at the top of this class, he thinks are setting the pace, are actually two guys from the same school, two LSU guys. Malik Neighbors he has at number 1, and then he has Brian Thomas at number 2, which is definitely a hot take. I think there are a lot of people that would disagree with him there, but I understand what he's saying about Malik Neighbors because the ability to separate is unlike pretty much anyone else in this draft. He has unreal speed. He can essentially, whenever the ball's in his hands, he could definitely score a touchdown. And then Brian Thomas is an absolute physical freak. So I kind of get where he's coming from, although I don't necessarily fully agree. I think in his next one, he went no bust NFL ready, and those were just Marvin Harrison Jr. He was alone in this group at the number 3 position, lower than a lot of people have him, including myself, which I'll get into here in a minute. But he's definitely a no bust, I can tell you that. I think he's just remarkable. And then in his final group, the high-end skill set group, he had two guys, Roma Dunze, who has been a part of the big-time conversation among the top 3 wide receivers in this group. He has him at 4, and then Roman Wilson, he has at 5, the wide receiver from Michigan, who's an absolute tactician. So I fully understand where he's coming from with some of these. With some of these, I tend to not agree at all. So let's jump into what I would think and what I would do if I was making these rankings. Let's start with the explosive wide receiver 1, the guy that he thinks is up top, the pace setter, I suppose, in this group of wide receivers. It's Marvin Harrison Jr. to me. I don't necessarily get much of an argument to not have Marvin Harrison Jr. in that spot, because I've just have not seen a wide receiver like this in my lifetime. I think his physical build is near perfect for a wide receiver in this day and age. His catch radius is out of this world. It's second to none, definitely in this class, and would be probably top 10 to top 5 in the NFL right this second. He has great hands, is a really solid route runner, although that's probably the area of his game that he could use the most work. He does not struggle with that necessarily by any means. He's just insane. He's wildly talented. His physical ability just jumps off the page. I think he's definitely going to be the number 1 wide receiver off the board, and I think he should be. He is an absolute game changer for whoever drafts him, because throw him wherever you want on the field, have him run whatever route you want, doesn't matter. The dude is going to make plays, and he's going to make a lot of them. So very excited to see what he can do at the next level, because, man, is he a player. He can do insane stuff on the football field. And then the no-bust NFL-ready group, I have a little bit different of a ranking here. I have Roma Dunze at 2 and then Malik Nabers at 3, and I think the line between those two is razor thin. I think Roma Dunze, in my opinion, might have the highest floor of any wide receiver in this class. I think he is absolutely perfect in route running. His hands are incredible, especially against tight coverage. If you look back at that Sugar Bowl game against Texas, he made some catches under very, very tight coverage that are not normal. He shows his hands very, very late, which makes it really hard for the corner to know when the ball is coming. He just does everything very, very professionally. So I think he is as NFL ready as anyone but Marvin Harrison Jr. in this group. I think he's just remarkable. And then Malik Nabers, as I talked about earlier, a threat to score whenever he touches the ball. I think he's just remarkable. He will definitely go top 10, and whoever gets him, whether it's in the slot or outside, most likely in the slot for the majority of the time. You could throw screens, you could throw end-arounds, you could do anything. As long as you get this guy into space, he's going to make some remarkable plays. So very excited to see what he can do and where he ends up, because I think that will have a big impact on his success at the next level. And then we have high-end skill set guys, and this group is entirely wide open to me. I don't think there's just 2 guys that fit into this category, but I think Brian Thomas is the one that kind of leads this group at wide receiver 4. I think he is very close to being a no-bust type guy, but his route running is something that definitely needs a little bit of more work. But at the end of the day, the physical ability is just off the charts. He is a freak athlete, has a huge catch radius, can do just so much stuff on the football field. You likely line him up outside most of the time, but he takes up a ton of attention, and there are a ton of safeties that will be playing over, worried about those 50-50 balls that he can bring down like really no one else. And then I have Adonai Mitchell there at wide receiver 5. I think his catch radius and hands are just out of this world, other than Marvin Harrison Jr. and maybe Brian Thomas, but Adonai Mitchell might have Brian Thomas beat in catch radius, because his is out of this world. He can make every single play. If you put the ball near him, he's probably coming down with it. It's just insane. That touchdown he had in the Sugar Bowl against Washington was just out of this world. So I think that's someone that fits in right around the 5 mark. I think this is where it gets kind of murky. There are a lot of different rankings for these guys, but I would go Keon Coleman right up there with him. Xavier Worthy, another guy. I think I would put Worthy at 6 likely. His speed is just out of this world. I don't understand how a team could pass up on him. I think if he gets the 32 and guys like Adonai Mitchell and Brian Thomas are off the board, I think it's very likely that Andy Reid and company take a chance on Xavier Worthy and just use his speed the way they use Tyreek Hill's speed and just let him fly down the field, and Patrick Mahomes will likely find you. Then we got Keon Coleman, someone who has just tons of physicality, could be a huge red zone target for a team. I think he's someone that will definitely surprise some people. Not necessarily the fastest guy in the world, but you don't necessarily need to be when you can make the catches that he can make in traffic. So big fan of him. Troy Franklin is kind of the Xavier Worthy way of things, just absolute outright speed. Could be a huge gadget guy until he kind of develops into that more complete receiver role that I think he's more than capable of being. And then Lad McConkey I have in this group. I think he is an absolute tactician. His route running is downright perfect. It's really hard to find a problem with his route running. It is just incredible. His hands are awesome. He has a ton of shiftiness after the catch, so really like this guy. And I think overall this wide receiver group is just out of this world. I think they can do so many incredible things, and there are tons of guys that I just went through that I think are going to be immediate impact guys at the next level. And there's still guys that absolutely could jump into that group early on in their career because there's so much talent deep in this class. Xavier Legette, the guy from South Carolina, is just the size and speed combo from this kid is just insane. It's kind of a Brian Thomas, Adonai Mitchell type vibe where the dude can fly, but he'll run you over as well. So I think he's someone that a team could definitely fall in love with. Had a great pro day at South Carolina's pro day, and I think he's someone that could shoot up the boards depending on what these teams need and how quickly the other wide receivers go off the board. Another guy, Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky, is an absolute beast. I think he's a little bit under the radar, but could be a perfect slot receiver for anyone who needs him. Has great hands, great route running ability. I think he is someone that some team is going to fall in love with, and whether it's the third round or the fourth round or maybe even the second, I think he will definitely come off the board a little bit earlier than people might be expecting. And then Roman Wilson, I would have a little bit lower down on the list. I know Chris Sims was very high on this kid, and I think he's a great route runner. He has elite hands, is obviously a very smart player, but I think he's just a little bit lower on the bar, especially when it comes to physical ability comparative to the other guys in this group. I think there's insane talent in this wide receiver group. I've talked about it a number of times on here, but this is the best wide receiver group I've seen. I think there is a ton of remarkable talent here. I think there's guys that do it different ways. There's different body types. There's different fits. There's tons of different ways you can fit a guy into your offense. So I bet there's 32 different rankings of these guys 1 through 10 because some people need a ton of slots. Some people need outside receivers that can make contested catches. Some guys need red zone threats. Some guys need gadget guys. So there's tons of different abilities here. There's tons of different fits here. And I think it really bodes well for this class because there are so many teams that are going to need wide receivers that there could be 5 or 6 wide receivers go in the first round and then another 3 or 4 in the second because, as we know in the NFL draft, when a couple of guys at a position start to go in quick succession, teams get a little bit nervous and they start to worry that they can't get the guy that they want when they have that pick. So maybe they trade up, maybe they take someone a little bit earlier than they're expecting. And I think this wide receiver group could absolutely force their hand. If Brian Thomas were to go, I think 18 likely is his falling mark, is usually where I've seen him in some mock drafts. If Adonai Mitchell goes between 18 and 32, you could very well see Xavier Worthy at 32. You could see Troy Franklin at 32, Keon Coleman. You could see any number of guys. But honestly, I don't see a reality where you don't see 5 wide receivers at least drafted in the first round. I think if Brian Thomas will go in the first round, I feel very confident about that. And then if Adonai Mitchell is on the board at 32, I don't think the Chiefs take that chance. I think they definitely take him and keep it moving and definitely build out that wide receiver group that Patrick Mahomes has been making up for a little bit in the past couple of years. So I think at the very least you'll see 5 guys go in the first round. You will see tons of wide receivers come off the board that a little bit later that you might not know the name of, or you might not know the school he went to, but you'll know his name pretty quickly because there are tons of guys in this group that will make immediate impacts on their team and will be huge difference makers. So very excited to see what this wide receiver class can do, and very excited to see where all of these guys go, because some of this is fit specific, but it'll be really interesting to see how all of that breaks out. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about breakout players in 2024. We've done a couple of these on the offensive side of the ball before, so this is part 3. So if you want to go check out the first 2, definitely do that. But we will be right back after this with some awesome breakout players for next year.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the wide receiver rankings that have come out from Chris Sims into this NFL draft period. I did not necessarily fully agree with what he had, but I think he had some very interesting takeaways from it. But now it's time for breakout players in 2024. We have done a couple of iterations of this, and more names keep coming to my mind. So we are going to continue the train on. Much more players to get to, and let's start with the quarterback position, and a guy that you probably might not know the name of. He definitely is a little bit under the radar, but Rocco Becht over at Iowa State, the guy under center for them, he might be the most overlooked quarterback in the country. I think another guy in the Big 12, Garrett Green, would have a lot to say about that, but Rocco Becht had a really solid year last year, 23 touchdowns, 8 picks. He had 3 scores on the ground, so not necessarily gaudy numbers, but Iowa State's offense isn't necessarily geared towards the quarterback having gaudy numbers. So I think it makes a lot of sense. He fits into that offense really, really well, is going into his second year as the starter, which is a huge help, obviously, whenever you can get a couple more reps under your belt and be the guy going through the entirety of offseason. I think that's one of the most important things for quarterbacks going into season. So I think he's someone that could lead Iowa State to a really, really good season and honestly probably play spoiler in the Big 12 a little bit. And I think the guy next to him will have a lot to do with that, the running back Abu Sama III. I think he's someone that was a little bit under the radar as well. Iowa State is not necessarily a team that gets a lot of national coverage, but very, very talented player that could take another step forward. And then Jaden Higgins on the outside, a very good wide receiver that is a big-time target, and I think it will definitely help out Rocco Becht. I think the Big 12 is honestly wide open. There are a couple of things that could go a couple of different ways that would help out Iowa State's chances here, and Rocco Becht is more than capable of stepping up to that challenge if the chance does arise for Iowa State to make some noise in the Big 12 this year. But let's get over to some running backs, the guys that are right next to Rocco Becht or right next to Jalen Milroe in this scenario. Justice Haynes, the running back from Alabama, is just an absolute beast. We talked about it with Marvin Harrison Jr., might be the perfect wide receiver build. It's hard to find a better running back build than Justice Haynes. He is a bruiser on the inside, but if you let him out in the open field, he can absolutely go. So he is someone that is as all-around of a running back as I've seen as a freshman. I think a lot of freshmen come onto the scene and they look shaky or they look a little bit, tentative at times. He did not. He ran with a lot of confidence, came on a little bit later in the year last year, but every time he touched the ball, he just looked different. It kind of reminds me, as a Texas fan, it kind of reminds me as the freshman year of Bijan Robinson, where didn't necessarily get the amount of touches that he probably should have been getting, but at the end of the day, when you saw him touch the ball, you were like, okay, there's something different about this kid. and it ended up being the case. So I think Justice Haynes is someone that could absolutely do that for Alabama. They're definitely going to need him next year. I think the passing game, not a ton of wide receivers that are super proven. Obviously, still a very talented group, but they're going to need the run game as much as possible, especially with Jalen Milroe in the backfield. I think having that quarterback run will help these other guys tremendously, and Justice Haynes will be chief among them. I think him with Jamarian Miller is about as good of a duo as there is in the league, a little Justice and Jam as they call them in Tuscaloosa. I think both those guys are going to be incredible, but Justice Haynes is one of those guys that just jumps off the page. So he's someone I definitely had to include in this series because he's an absolute beast. He can do so many different things in the run and pass game, and I think he's someone that, whether or not it's this year or in a couple of years, he will etch his name into Alabama history as one of the better running backs that has come through there. Another running back in the SEC, formerly the SEC West, is Ulysses Bentley, the fourth, the running back from Ole Miss. He's someone that is super, super shifty and is stepping into some big shoes. Quinshon Judkins, as we've talked about time and again, is on his way to Ohio State, a big-time transfer, and was a big-time player for Ole Miss this past year. But Bentley is more than capable of stepping into that role. I think he is very shifty. He kind of reminds me of someone like Tajay Spears, who came out of Tulane a couple of years ago. Very, very talented guy that can catch the ball. If you put him on inside zones and stuff like that to the interior of the line, it's a little bit tougher on him, but he can still shift and find his way through. Very, very talented. Came over from SMU a couple of years ago and hasn't been the guy, but now is stepping into that role. I think obviously having the spread out offense that they're going to have with Caden Prieskorn and Trey Harris and Juice Wells, on the outside is going to help him tremendously. Tons of running lanes will open, and then he's going to get gone very quickly because the dude can run. He's an absolute beast, and I can't wait to see him in the big-time role after sitting behind Quinshon Judkins these past couple of years. Another guy that has been sitting behind a remarkable running back is Phil Maffa, the running back over at Clemson. He was obviously sitting behind Will Shipley, who was one of the best running backs in the entire country. Hard to argue with having to sit behind that guy, but now it's Phil Maffa's time. He can finally step into that big-time role. He was mainly used as kind of a goal line or third down guy last year, but now it's his time to shine. Now it's going to be a lot more touches coming his way, and I think the one big benefit for him is Garrett Riley is going into his second year as OC of Clemson, so he now has the ability to kind of get his hands into the offense a little bit more, get a little bit more comfortable, understand what Cade Klubnik does well, and then Phil Maffa can kind of play off that. So if Phil Maffa can get the TCU Garrett Riley and get that play calling, I think he's someone that could absolutely burst onto the scene and possibly bring Clemson back to where they probably should be, which is at the top of the ACC, playing for that title pretty much year in, year out, not winning 9 games and missing out on the ACC title. So I think Phil Maffa is going to be a huge player for them, and I'm very excited to see what he can do. A guy that needs to be a big player for his team if they're going to make a run is Tyler Morris, the wide receiver over at Michigan. He is someone that, if he doesn't step up, I'm not sure if there's another guy that will. They are bringing in a couple of very talented freshmen, but at the end of the day, freshmen in the Big Ten is a tough proposition at wide receiver. So I think Tyler Morris is someone that could be a huge-time player. He did score a touchdown in that semifinal game against Alabama. You might remember the crosser that he kind of took up the sideline with a ton of speed and dove for the pylon. A very, very athletic play, shows what he can kind of bring to the table, but obviously did not necessarily play a ton with Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson in front of him. It was tough to get the reps that he wanted, especially when you play multiple tight end sets or you play a little bit more jumbo the way that Michigan does. It's harder for wide receivers to get that rotation in the way that they would like, but Tyler Morris is someone that could absolutely burst on the scene, and they kind of need him to because I'm not too confident in Alex Orji's ability to just run this offense quite as fluidly as J.J. McCarthy did. He is someone that put the ball exactly where it needed to be, exactly when it needed to be there, probably 9 times out of 10, and I don't think that's something that Alex Orji can necessarily do. So I think he's going to need some help from some really talented wide receivers, and Tyler Morris would be as big a part of that as anyone. So I think if you're trying to rank people that are most important to this offensive success of Michigan, Tyler Morris would be right up there near the top, because they need a threat downfield if they're going to be able to compete with the Ohio States and the Oregons and the Washingtons of the world that they do have to play. So very interested to see what he can do, if he can step into that big-time role. And then a guy that was very, very interesting last year is Dillon Bell, the wide receiver from Georgia. He's listed as a wide receiver. He is a utility player as far as I'm concerned. He just plays football every Saturday, and that's what I love about him. He is someone that can catch, can run, he can even pass. He had 2 rushing touchdowns last year, 2 receiving touchdowns, and threw for a touchdown against Tennessee. So he's someone that they just kind of like to play around with. They have a ton of different plays drawn up for him, because when the ball gets in his hands, he makes a lot of really, really good plays. He's a very good route runner. He's someone that you really never know where he's going to pop up on the field, so it makes it really hard to defend him. And then whenever your running back or wide receiver in this case can throw a pass, it's never a bad thing for your team. So Dillon Bell is one of the most interesting players in the entire country, in my opinion. He is someone that can play inside, outside, can play in the backfield, can do wildcat, can return punts if you need him to. He will literally do anything because he just wants to be on the field. Is a little bit undersized. I feel like Georgia has something cooking over there with wide receivers that come in a little bit undersized, ending up being their big-time guys, with Ladd McConkey last year, obviously. And then Dillon Bell, I think, will probably be the go-to receiver for Carson Beck. They had a very, very good connection a year ago, and I think he's someone that Carson Beck will be looking towards a lot in 2024. And with the way that offense, I think, is going to run, Dillon Bell could be someone that definitely bursts on the scene. It'll definitely be more of a spread it out type offense, so not necessarily a ton of targets going Dillon Bell's way, or at least definitely not the majority of the targets. They will be spread out all over the place, but he is someone that when they need a third down, when they need a play, I think that's where Carson Beck will be looking almost immediately. So very excited to see what he can do. He's someone that whenever he's on the field, just watch out for 86, because he's going to do something really cool. And then a tight end to end it out here, we have Jaleel Skinner, a guy that came over from Miami, is now at Louisville, was a very, very talented guy coming out of high school, a 4-star with just a remarkable catch radius. I think his wingspan was 80 inches, which is just mind-boggling stuff at tight end. Can really move, is more of that kind of wide receiver tight end hybrid that we've started to see more and more as offenses have spread out more and more. And I think he's someone that Jeff Braun in Louisville can use really, really effectively in the red zone, in third downs. Tyler Shuck is the big question mark here. Can he put the ball on target, on time to Skinner and to everyone else in that group? Because it's a really talented pass-catching group, which almost lends itself more to Skinner being able to be a big part of that offense, because when you have to spread out the defense and guard, 3 wide receivers all the way out to the numbers, then the seams open up and the tight end can do a lot of damage over the middle of the field. And I think that's where Jaleel Skinner will likely be a big part of that offense. I think he's someone that might just be the bridge from Louisville having a good offense that they can, make some teams nervous at times, but not necessarily be super explosive, to be a team that's really elite when it comes to the offensive side of the ball in the ACC. I think he is a huge game changer for them if they use him correctly and can kind of garner that talent that Miami kind of struggled to fully get a grasp of while he was there. But new scenery can always help a team, or can always help a team, can always help a player. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what he can do. There are so many guys across the country that are going to make huge impacts for their team on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. So don't expect this series to stop anytime soon, because there are tons of guys I was thinking of as I was writing down that list. So we will definitely be coming back to the offensive side. We'll be coming back to the defensive side pretty soon here. So definitely stay tuned for more editions of that. But we're going to take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to go back to the kind of basketball football route here. We're going to talk about the top 10 teams from this past year that had a great year in basketball and football. So the athletic department being very happy around this time of year for these teams. So stick with us, and we will be right back with that. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the breakout players for 2024 on the offensive side of the ball, and now it's time for another Top 10 Tuesday. And today, we're going to kind of blur the lines. We're going to go into a little bit of March Madness mode here. We're going to talk about the teams that did a great job this year in football and in basketball, made their athletic directors very, very happy. And we're going to start with the Alabama Crimson Tide. I think they are a team that absolutely burst onto the scene in basketball this year. I don't know what just happened there. I apologize. There we are. They are a team that absolutely burst onto the scene a year ago and did a ton of really, really remarkable things in the football and in the basketball space. I think the basketball team is the one that was playing catch-up here for a very long time, but they might have just caught up. They obviously were in the mix throughout the entire year in the SEC for basketball, earned a 4 seed in the tournament, and then on the football side of things, although it was not a vintage Alabama year, it was still a very, very good year that got them to the playoff, which is not something a lot of teams can say in this scenario. But let's keep it rolling here. We have another team that I think is just doing incredible things on both sides. In this scenario, the football team's kind of playing catch up to the basketball squad, but the football team is doing a great job. They obviously had an incredible year with Jed Fish and Noah Fafita leading the way there. The basketball team was absolutely dominant throughout their Pac-12 schedule, led by Caleb Love, the UNC transfer, got a 2 seed in the tournament, and a lot of people, including myself, are picking them to come out of that region and be in the Final Four. So very excited to see what they can do in the tournament. But also, this Arizona football program, I think, is one that is building up a ton of steam and someone that a lot of y'all will be hearing a lot from in the new iteration of the Big 12. Then let's keep rolling down the list here. At number 3, I do have Texas, another team in football that made their way to the playoff like Alabama. Did get that huge win over Bama early in the year. That obviously helped a lot. For basketball, it was a little bit of an up and down year, kind of in the middle of the pack for the Big 12 for most of the year, but got a 7 seed in the tourney and has been a really, really solid basketball program for a number of years. The Texas athletic department is obviously one of the premier ones across the country, and they're doing just incredible things across most every sport. I think there are definitely some Texas fans that would tell you this basketball season was a failure, but we'll find out this week, I think. Tennessee is at my 4th spot, and this is one where the basketball team might be more talented, might be more successful than the football team, but it's still a football school, I gotta say. Tennessee basketball was one of the most dominant teams in recent history with the SEC. They did incredible things with Dalton Connect leading the way for them. And then in football, kind of an up and down year with Joe Milton. They were definitely expecting a little bit more after a remarkable year with Hendon Hooker the year before, but I think they're still moving in the right direction. I think Josh Heupel has that program where he wants it, and I think Nico Iamaleava coming in obviously helps that a ton. At number 5, I do have Clemson. Clemson basketball had kind of an up and down year in the ACC, found their way into the tournament as a 6 seed, only behind UNC and Duke, so whenever you can find yourself behind only those two in the ACC, you're probably doing pretty well. So I think Clemson is more than happy about where they're at on the basketball side of things. On football, I think they're a little bit less happy. Definitely a down year in 2023, but still won 9 games. And if you're winning 9 games in a down year, you're obviously a remarkable program. So I think Clemson football will be honestly a little bit back to normal this year. I'm not sure quite how far back to normal. I haven't quite gotten too deep into Clemson quite yet, but at the end of the day, I think this is a very, very talented team, and obviously this year in particular did a great job on the hardwood and on the field. Number 6, I got Oregon. Obviously, the football team is kind of leading the way here with Bo Nix, that electric offense. Did miss out on a Pac-12 title, which definitely stings. But the basketball team did not. They got a big time, kind of taking the world by storm in the Pac-12 tourney to get their bid to win that one, with their big boy Dante kind of leading the way there. Their matchup against South Carolina in the tournament is one that would be really fun on the field as well as on the hardwood. So I think this is a program, this is an athletic department that is definitely moving in the right direction, especially with football, but basketball gets their fair share every now and then, and Dana Altman, whenever he gets into the tournament, is a very dangerous guy. So Oregon's definitely a team to watch there. North Carolina comes in at 7. Obviously, basketball is North Carolina. That's who they are. I think they are someone that is going to make a ton of strides in football here shortly. Obviously, a fast start to last season, kind of a slow end to the year, but still had a very solid year. It's something that North Carolina fans have become a little bit too accustomed to when it comes to football, when it comes to starting slow and ending the year fast. But the basketball team did win a regular season ACC title, came up short against NC State in the tournament title game, but found their way into the tournament, are a 1 seed. They will be leading the way in one of those divisions. So the basketball team is business as usual, really, and the football team is still kind of working their way a little bit. Kentucky still on this list. Kentucky basketball, one of the most electric offenses in the entire country this year. Reed Shepherd, Rob Dillingham, tons of guys on that team that are just remarkable to watch. And then Kentucky football, kind of like UNC, had a fast start, kind of a slow finish that started with an absolute beating in Athens, Georgia at the hands of the Bulldogs. But I think they're going to play a lot of really good football going forward, and I think they played a lot of really good football last year. I just think they had a schedule that was an absolute nightmare from start to finish. So I think Kentucky football had honestly a better year than their record indicated. And then Kansas did incredible things on the football field, have started to kind of build things up with Lance Leipold at the helm there. Jalen Daniels, obviously a huge part of that as well. They have been kind of making their way back up to, or not necessarily back up, but up in that football conversation. And then the basketball team, even in a down year, is a 4 seed in the tournament. So kind of like Clemson and football, if you're a 4 seed in the tournament in a bad year, in a quadrant where Kansas could absolutely make a run, I think you would take that 10 times out of 10. So Kansas, obviously a blue blood in basketball, and a team in football that is definitely making quite the rise here recently. South Dakota State is going to round out this list. As we talked about earlier, national champions in the FCS, a remarkable team all throughout the year, totally undefeated, so had to give some respect to those guys. Basketball rolled through the Summit League title, got a big win over Denver University to get to the tournament, and they will play Iowa State in the first round. Definitely a tough matchup for them. Iowa State is on an absolute roll coming off that Big 12 championship, but watch out for the Jackrabbits. I think that's a team that obviously it's a 15-2, but we've seen 15-2s in the past couple of years, so I think it's very possible that South Dakota State is the next team to add their name to that list. But a lot of really, really tough rankings here, to be totally honest. It's very hard to contextualize how to rate all these, how to measure all these, and it was not easy. I think Duke absolutely could have been on this list. I think maybe they should have, honestly, looking back on it. But at the end of the day, I feel pretty good about this 10. I think there are a ton of programs, athletic departments that are very happy, and there are teams that are starting to kind of make inroads to join this list. There are tons of teams in the SEC that are starting to put more and more money into basketball and make that a more premier sport on their campus. I think Auburn obviously has done great things in basketball, winning the SEC title this past week, and in football starting to kind of make their way up under Hugh Freeze. So I think this is definitely a list that will be morphing throughout the years, but for right now, I think these are the teams that have kind of set themselves above the pack when it comes to football and men's basketball in 2023, 2024. I think there is a ton to watch in this upcoming tournament. And then there's a ton to watch in the 2024 season with all of these football teams. A lot of really interesting talking points. Obviously, Bama, Nick Saban walks out the door, tons to deal with. You have Arizona building off the year that they just had. Same thing with Texas. Same thing with Oregon. So tons of teams to watch in this group. I think whether you're a big-time basketball fan or you're a big-time football fan, I think you can get a little kick out of this list and kind of enjoy it for what it is. So definitely a very interesting exercise, one that as you're going through it, you never know if you're making the right decision or putting people in the right spot. But at the end of the day, I think I got to a pretty solid top 10. But that will do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means so much to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us here at the network. Also, follow us on Facebook or Twitter, or X if you'd like to call it that. I still call it Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for all of the content and updates that we will be putting out on a daily basis. We have so many incredible people doing work on every sport you could think of, from basketball to baseball to college football to wrestling. So anything you could possibly want, we have it covered. Obviously, if you're a big basketball March Madness guy, my guy Nelson over on the basketball podcast will definitely get you taken care of there. We'll have some great insight. We also have some sports guys, TJ and Jeremy, that do incredible jobs, and definitely will be covering the March Madness bracket as it starts to unfold. So tune into those shows if you're a March Madness guy. If you want to keep up on everything college football, right here is where you need to be at 9 a.m. Eastern every day, Monday through Friday. That's where I'm going to be. So again, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow.